You're listening to Answers for the Family with Alan Cardoza, right here on LA Talk Radio.
Greetings to all of you listening around the world, and a warm welcome as I bring you another edition of the Answers for the Family radio show. I am your guest host and international kindness expert, speaker, and author, Gabriella Van Rij. Kindness stands central in everything I undertake. From the Dare to Be Kind movement, as most of you listeners already know, I've been on the road for 11 months. Trekking throughout the USA. But I came off the road in the beginning of October to take a well-deserved pause, because living in a tent, even though it's comfortable on top of my roof, it is truly exhausting. But next year, I will continue my adventure to bring the message that you too can be the difference to everyone in the USA and beyond. You know, when you are out and about, you know that kindness needs a prominent place in our daily lives. But we have too many excuses not to. My fourth book will be coming out soon, and Alan Cardoza will be interviewing me on that to teach how we can make kindness a choice. And according to Alan Cardoza, this is the reason that I'm a perfect fit to host today's show in his absence. And as you may or may not all know, Alan Cardoza is always helping someone. He is out there either helping a runaway teen or a family in trouble. And so we wish him well while he's on the road on November 11th, which is Veterans Day in the United States, and I think for many around the world. So one of the things that we always are asking you is we need show ambassadors. Each week, the show addresses issues such as locating runaway teens, family crisis intervention, building self-esteem, and dealing with addiction, increasing our quality of life and longevity, and so much more. Alan has told me that he and Janin Chapin, the show producer, choose top professionals in many of the helping fields and skilled authors, and that they believe are working to make this world a better place for all. Yes, they definitely are, Janet and Alan. And our next guest knows all about helping other people, and specifically teens. The title of today's topic is Beneath the Surface, a teen's guide to reaching out when you or your friend is in crisis. Kristi Hugstad, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, is the author of this book. And unfortunately, she has a story that turned tragic when her husband completed suicide in 2012. And after years of struggling with clinical depression and running in front of a train, she has dedicated her life to helping to abolish the stigma of mental health, illness, and issues. A certified grief recovery specialist and a grief and loss facilitator for recovering addicts at South Coast Behavioral Health, Kristi frequently speaks at high schools, and she is also the host of the Grief Girl podcast and lives in Orange County, California. Kristi, I am so happy to have you on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
And as I was telling you, as we were waiting for the show to come on, I think Janet and Alan just must have orchestrated this in the back perfectly, because as I was reading who you are and what you're doing, I just got goosebumps for a second, because I brought out in 2014, I brought out a documentary called Our Silence is Complicity. Our students, our children suffer behind closed doors, and it is about teen suicide. But I must honestly say I addressed suicide as early as 7 years old. So we couldn't have been better fitted together. So
right, this is absolutely perfect.
Yeah, this is divine intervention, Kristi.
Yes, it is.
Yes. So I have spoken in many schools too. So I think, I'm just going to throw our sheet out of the window, and we're going to do this naturally as two coaches and two people who love to help others. And, Kristi, what I want to say, because I really do want to touch on your husband before we start on the children, is I feel you took your pain and made it into your greatest strength. So you have become the cause's best ally, Kristi, and the expert. Do you care to tell our listeners a little bit about your husband?
Well, absolutely. And you know what? You are right. I had two choices after my husband's suicide. And I remember thinking, I have depression myself. I don't know what happened. My life has been turned upside down. And then I thought, okay, here are your two choices. You can either wallow in self-pity and become the victim of your tragedy, or you can take that pain and you can do something with it and help educate people so that nobody else has to ever experience the type of pain and darkness that you're going through right now. So for me, it was a no-brainer. I needed to do something with that pain to educate and help other people so this epidemic of suicide can finally get under control and hopefully eventually eliminated. So it all started.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to make sure that people realize while listening to her voice sounds very resilient here at the moment, but you are passionate because it hides your own adversity. So I just wanted the listener to have that sink in, because we sound like two strong women that go kind of like, let's go. But there is a lot of pain to get to this point. That's all I wanted to say.
Yes. And you know what? I absolutely, when I'm on a podcast or a radio show or speaking in front of a group, hopefully I can keep myself together for that allotted amount of time. But that's not an accurate portrayal of my grief, because your listeners also need to know that if they have experienced any kind of loss that they're grieving, that it's a roller coaster ride and it's a journey. It's not a destination. So if you are having a bad day and you need to lay down and take a nap for an hour, be kind to yourself and give yourself permission to not always be on top of your game. And that's okay, because you're in this for the long haul. And I think if people sometimes realize that, and some days they allow themselves to lower their expectations of themselves, that helps you to be able to tolerate your grief journey. So, you're right. We're not always on top of our game. And some days are very dark. And some days I feel the pain of my husband's suicide, just like it happened yesterday.
I totally understand that you're saying that. I lost someone recently and people are telling me to kind of get over it, but that's not how grief works, does it?
No, it doesn't work like that at all. And people think there are stages of grief and they unfold linear and neatly, and that when you reach that fifth stage of grief, which is acceptance, that you're good to go. Your grief is over and you are able now to get over it and just get on with your life as if nothing happens. But unfortunately, that's not the case, and there are no stages of grief. I like to think of them as common responses, because not everybody experiences grief in the same way. And your grief is unique to you and the loss that you are grieving. And so, to give you an example, I wasn't in denial of my husband's suicide. He had been talking about suicide. He was demonstrating all the risk factors and warning signs of depression and suicide. And when he finally did complete the act, I wasn't in denial, and that is the first stage. So I didn't experience the stages of grief. And what I think is also important to understand is they repeat themselves. Like, I have accepted my husband's death, but sometimes I still get angry. And sometimes I feel like, did this really happen? So you don't think that there's a pattern and there are stages and that it's going to be over. And you know what? For somebody to tell you you should be over it by now, that's really insensitive, because I'm speaking personally. Even though it's been 7 years since my husband's suicide, sometimes it's harder for me now than it was, immediately after his death, because now I'm able to miss, we didn't have children. All the holidays that I've spent alone, there's secondary losses that also go with the actual loss itself. And sometimes the more time that goes on, you start to experience all these secondary losses, and sometimes that can add to your pain.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you say that for the listener, because we are insensitive, because like I said, I just lost someone in April, but it's not about time. Time has nothing to really do with that.
No, but time does not heal all wounds.
No, time.
That's a myth.
Time does not, and we just miss them. Let's be honest. If you love the person, no matter how long ago it is, you miss them, and you don't miss them maybe every single second of every single moment of the day. But there are those, like you just said, you're coming close to a holiday, and no matter if you sit in a room full of people with a beautiful Thanksgiving table, your thoughts will go to your husband's. I'm sure they do.
Yes. And, my husband's suicide was October, right? So the first holiday without him was Thanksgiving. And when I went to my family Thanksgiving dinner, the person on my left didn't make it. So during the Thanksgiving dinner, there was an empty seat to my left. So that was, wow, that is really symbolic of him not being here. And it was really difficult for me, so instead of making everybody uncomfortable, nobody knew how to handle it. I thought, you know what, I'm going to do what I can to kind of salvage this and make it comfortable. So I proposed a toast, and everybody raised their glass in honor of Bill and the first holiday without him. And then it was comfortable from there on. So the holidays are tough. And you know what, this Thanksgiving may be really hard. I don't know. But time is not, you can't say you should be over it, because sometimes the longer they're gone, the more you miss them. And the pain can actually be almost worse.
Okay, thanks. I'll look forward to that. Right. Because I was just going like, oh my God, because for me, it's going to be the first holidays, right? The first Christmas. So,
right. But you know what? My best advice to you is have a plan. Right. I mean, I have people that say, I don't know if I can do the holidays traditionally like we always have, because my spouse or my child is not here, and that's too painful. But you know what? That's okay. Maybe you do the holidays differently. Maybe you decide you're not going to go to one of them. Maybe you need, instead of to go to a holiday just to please everybody else, maybe you need to skip that holiday and just practice some self-care and be off somewhere by yourself for your own healing, and give yourself permission to do that. That's okay. And everybody else will understand. So, I think we all kind of, our society conditions us that you just show up. I don't care if your spouse just died or your best friend or your, a loved one. You just show up because that's what families do, and that's not fair. You need to do what works for you and put your self-care first.
Love it. Thank you very much. And the listeners will definitely take that in, because we all need a little bit more self-care. So one of my first questions to you is, you said two things already that I have a question for, but how do we make the listener understand how you jumped from losing your husband to helping the teens? Was there a reason that you are specifically going after the teens? Is it because the suicide rates are high, or is it because you wanted to catch them early?
Well, both. Initially, my mission, and still is to educate people and get rid of the stigma of mental illness. That's where it has to start. because my husband was 54 when he killed himself. He ran in front of a Metrolink train in Dana Point where we lived. And to make it even more tragic, which I think will help your listeners understand how sick and how deep his major depression was, is his father was on the train that he ran in front of. So, that just kind of adds another level to how deep he was into his depression. And it wasn't so much that he wanted to die, but he wanted to end that emotional torture that he was experiencing. He never reached out for help. He bought into that stigma that mental illness is a sign of weakness, and you are not a man if you show emotion. And he was brought up like that as a young boy, and that needs to stop.
I like that you said that.
And I think we all think, oh, anytime there's death, there's guilt, there's, we all think, what if I'd only done this? Or if only. And so for me, I would think, what if he'd said, Kristi, I am really depressed and I need medical intervention. Maybe if we'd gone about trying to get him help as a team, things would have been differently. So I keep replaying that over and over in my head, wishing that the story had ended differently. But to abolish the stigma that a lot of us have already bought into, that needs to start with our youth, our teens and our young people. And as you said, starts as early as age 7. They need to grow up in a culture where your mental health is as important as your physical health.
Absolutely.
And that when you go to get a physical for school or for sports, you also get a mental health evaluation. You are treated for it. You have to know that it's okay to not be okay. And that still is not happening in our culture with our youth. So for me, writing Beneath the Surface was an attempt, or is an attempt, not only to end the epidemic of teen suicide, but I want our kids and our youth to know that they're not alone. They matter, and all these different issues that they're experiencing, they're part of, a lot of them are a part of growing up in this time as a young person. So I cover cyberbullying, bullying, self-harm, eating disorders, gender confusion, technology addiction, depression, anxiety, peer, academic, parental pressures, and suicidal ideation. And they need to know, that, hey, I'm not alone. This is happening to teens in schools worldwide. And so I wrote the book not as a textbook, but I wrote to the teens in a language that they can understand. And here are the warning signs. Here are the risk factors. This is for the teens, the parents, anybody with a teen in their life. And then at the end of the book, which I think is one of the most important things,
okay,
I always get people to say, everybody always talks about start the conversation. We need to talk about mental health. But what I find when I go to schools, as the teachers, administrators, counselors, they don't know how to start that conversation, right?
Okay.
So it's one thing to say it. It's another thing to give people tools to actually do it. So at the end of the book, for each chapter, I have discussion questions so you can sit down with your child, or the teacher can use it as a lesson plan in the school, and it will help you have these difficult talks with our teens. So yeah, it's mainly about our youth growing up without the stigma of mental illness, because it's really hard to change, people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who were brought up, especially for guys, as young men, thinking it's not okay. It's not okay to say you're not okay. Suck it up. You need to be a man, and it's not okay to show your emotions.
Absolutely. But just like you were just saying, this is where we need to bring it into the schools as early as kindergarten, where we teach that we are interested in knowing what they are feeling, what they are thinking behind the facade of the ABCs, right?
Yes. And, I have 2 nieces that are kindergarten teachers. And what's really cool is I watching and asking and inquiring about their school curriculum at, age 5. And it's all about teaching kindness. It's about teaching acceptance and inclusion and looking to see if anybody's left out and giving hugs when they walk in. And, I didn't grow up like that. I don't know if you did, but
no.
But
sorry, I have to laugh.
I just think that's so wonderful that the teachers, at least the ones that are in my life, are teaching kids inclusion. And that hopefully, if that carries on grade level after grade level, that will help to stop the bullying. Because we will be teaching our young people that if you see somebody being bullied, say something and do something, and don't stand around and watch it or get video footage on your iPhone, which is what's happening now.
Yeah.
So that is what's really, really cool about starting, with kindergartners.
Yep. So I have a question for you for the teens here. Let's go towards everyone who's listening who has children out there. Let's think about middle schoolers, okay? That very pre-teen age, very delicate age, I find. I love talking to them, and I'm sure you do too. So that age group, keep that in mind for a second. What is something that you could, for example, say to the listener about the bullying and how we could diffuse it or actually start the conversation at home to find out more what is happening in the school? Because we often don't know, right, as parents? So that's one question. Right. And the second question, and this is a big one, I have called... I don't say bullying anymore. I don't say the word. I found other words. But I have honed the word called cyber torment, because for the last 9 years, I have basically asked the children to give me their definition of what they think goes on. And the word came that it's so painful that I made the leap to torment. They feel tormented. So that is the second angle, because if we're talking about suicide, we're also talking about this bullying phenomena and the technology of today. So what are your thoughts on that with suicide? Is that, first of all, how can the parents start the conversation to find out what's going on in school?
Well, I think the most important thing, there's a few things that are really important. Number one, find a time to have a discussion with your kids where there's no distraction, where you're kind of holding them hostage, whether it's they're in the car, right, and you have a half-hour drive somewhere, or at night when you're sitting at the end of their bed. And instead of being accusatory and making your child putting them on the defensive, like, what's going on? Or notice a change in behavior. Like, Jason, I've noticed that you've been unusually quiet lately, or you've been spending more time in your room. Is everything okay? Or I noticed when your friend Paul was over, you guys were, when I walked into the room, you stopped talking or you laughed, or, and I love you so much, and I just want to know if there's anything going on or if you're okay. So so notice a change in behavior, and it doesn't have to be with your child. It can be with your child's peers when they've been over, if you've noticed them at school. Instead of like, are you doing drugs? Or, and, immediately, you're not doing drugs, are you? Of course they're going to say, absolutely not, Mom, and how dare you, whatever. So watch your tone and make it an observation about their behavior that is warranting the concern. And like, we're going to get through this. We're going to get through this together. So don't put them on the defensive, and because then they're immediately going to lie to you. That's their knee-jerk reaction.
Going to lie and shut down, right? They shut down.
Shut them down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you also have to realize as a parent that just because that time where they're in bed and you're sitting at the end of their bed is convenient for you, that may not be the right moment where they really feel like opening up and sharing. Yep. So, and especially a lot of times for boys. And so you might get that, no, I'm fine. And that's okay. You can't force them to have that conversation when the time is not appropriate for them. So what you do is you leave the lines of communication open. You say, okay, you know what, Josh, I get it. It's late, but I just want you to know if there's ever a time that you want to talk, I'm always here for you. I love you. And I just want the best for you. And whatever you're going through, I'm going through it with you. Mm-hmm. And maybe 3 days later, they might say, hey, you know what, Mom, or you know what, Dad, remember when we had that talk? And you know what, there is something I want to talk about. So you don't press to get the response because it's convenient for you, mm-hmm. because sometimes your child is going to shut down and shut mm-hmm. you down, and that's okay too.
But do you find that this bullying or the harassment or anything they have like that at school could lead to suicide, especially if you don't know about it and especially if you can't help your child?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I think one of the big causes of teen suicide is bullying and the cyberbullying. Because here's what's happening. At least I'll speak for myself. When I was their age, when I got home from school, I had a safe place, and that was my house. Because they couldn't cyberbully me because they didn't have iPhones. Mm-hmm. So if they wanted to continue to bully, and I was bullied in the 9th grade, so I understand what that feels like, they had to call my house and my landline, and my father would probably answer, right? So at least when I got home, I had a safe place. Yep. And unfortunately for teens today, they don't have that. As a matter of fact, when they get home from school, if they've been bullied during the day, it actually amps up when they get home because everybody is free now. They're not in class. And it's real easy for somebody to be a coward and cyberbullying somebody else anonymously. And so the cyberbullying and the bullying to me is one of the biggest causes of teen suicide, because what happens is they're comparing themselves to their peers on technology. Mm-hmm. They may not be getting the likes on Snapchat or Instagram like their peers. And that is the gauge that they judge themselves by at that age, right? So if they're watching their friends going out and going to movies together and they're not included, they're not getting likes. And now they're getting, as you said, cyber tormented. Their self-esteem is so delicate anyway at that age. Mm-hmm. And now it's at an all-time low. So what's happening for these teens is it's not so much that they want to die, but their whole world is their peers. And Absolutely. When their peers are turning on them, they want to end the torment because then life is not worth living. So for them, just like adults, it's more of an effort to end the pain. And their world is very small. Yep. And the only way that they can stop that pain is by taking their life.
Absolutely. I totally understand that. I've sat with many of them that gave that explanation. Thank you for saying that. I have a question, but at the same time from a listener, but I really want to read this to you because they were sent in advance. I think you're going to love this, Kristi. Okay. It says, it's Tanya from Washington, and it says, I'm a psychologist and a parent of a middle schooler, so it's very appropriate, right? When I asked my son to help me understand why several of his friends were having behavioral and drug issues, he just shrugged his shoulders and said, it's complicated. A month later, one of his friends was expelled for smoking marijuana on school grounds. Out of the blue, my son has opened up to me and said the drugs weren't his friend's big problem. It was his depression and talking about not seeing a reason to live. Last night, I showed him the summary on your book, and he suggested we read it together. I told him I wanted to take the lead. Yeah, isn't this beautiful, Kristi?
I told him almost in tears.
Oh, good, because you did a good job. Look at this. I told him I wanted him to take the lead on this, as I believe the path that your book has opened for us will provide a startling point on what he can do next to help his friend. So basically, she's telling you, thank you, Kristi, for giving us the answers and the tools that my child and I need right now. So
you know what? That every minute I spent writing beneath the surface, worth it. And I've always said, if I could help one person, everything that I've done is worth it. So thank you for that. That just made my year.
Good. Well, Kristi, it should make your life, because you helped one human being that you know for sure. Actually, it's not true. You helped two, the son and the mother. And so that's terrific. We are going into break right now in a little commercial. We'll be right back under a minute. I promise, everyone. Stay put.
Hi, I'm Marty Cove. You might remember me from my film roles such as the Sensei in the Karate Kid films and a variety of others. I've done over 100 films and countless stunts in my career, and I've always given 100% physically. As fun as it was, I've had to have multiple surgeries from doing some of my own stunts. With the damage done to my body over time, I needed to find relief from this chronic pain. My passion for health and fitness drove me to find a natural way to combat body and muscle pain without taking medication every day. Teaming up with doctors, detectives, and a compounding pharmacist, we created Marty's Cobra Cove Ultra Strength Pain Relief Cream. Our CBD cream is whole plant extracted and made with high-quality amino acids and essential oils that can improve the strength and the absorption. Other CBD products, well, they aren't like ours. It's the only thing that has been strong enough to knock out my pain. And I'm not the only one. Thousands of other people have benefited from the healing attributes of these products worldwide. So check out our website at www.martyscobracove.com. It's legal, it's safe, and it's 100% effective. So show your pain no mercy.
So, hi, everyone. We're back with the topic titled Beneath the Surface with Kristi Hugstad, who is the author of Beneath the Surface. Kristi, I want to go straight into a question, one more question that I have. That way we're sure to have them and they're out of the way. This is a man called Terrence in Pennsylvania, and his name, and he is a police officer, and he says, most parents have no clue what is happening under their own noses. The facts are 90% of prescription drug addicts reported that they started using prescription drugs in middle school or high school. Most using their parents' or grandparents' prescriptions. Laws are changing nationwide. Trying to let my friends' kids know that if their kid only shares a prescription or a drug with a friend, regardless of how they were obtained, the child can be charged as a drug dealer. And if a child overdoses, the child that shared the drug can be charged with homicide. I so agree that we have to get our kids involved with helping their friends, but we also need to shake both our youth and their parents out of their dream states as to the consequences. Do you address any of this part in your book? And if not, would you add it in a sequel to your book?
Well, I actually do. There is a chapter on substance abuse. So, yes,
okay.
I do address it in the book. And I also want to stress that, you know, a lot of our kids that have depression, in order to mask the pain, they are turning to alcohol and drugs. So the actual cause of the use can be depression. You know, sometimes it's peer pressure and curiosity. And I also want to let you know that I also work with addicts, and I do the grief and loss work and basically get to the root of what was the cause of you starting to use. And since I've worked with hundreds of addicts, both, you know, male and female, they start using, the average age is 13. Mm-hmm. And it is in the schools, and it is no longer, you know, just having a beer on a Friday night. There are students that are share the locker or have the locker next door to your kid, and they could be selling heroin. And I agree with him wholeheartedly that parents are really naive about what's going on in school.
Yeah.
But the addicts, when I speak directly to addicts, they all started at around age 13. They started smoking pot. They started drinking. They started stealing alcohol from their parents' cabinets and watering it down. And then they started, going into the medicine cabinet and stealing any meds. It didn't even matter what it was, from their parents. And then after they realized that wasn't really numbing their pain, then they started, being introduced to heroin and meth. But pretty much everybody says the same story. They started young, every single one of them.
But may I ask you why they started? Could you give us an example just for the parents, just something so that we know for the listeners?
Yes, I will say the number one response I get is they never felt loved.
Oh.
Some will say I had two parents that were meth addicts. My dad was a heroin addict. A lot of them are from, have one parent, and that parent was working and they were unsupervised. But when it comes down to it, the common denominator that all of the addicts had is no matter how they grew up, it was that they didn't feel love, and they were trying to find that from substances, from drugs, from alcohol, from their peers, somewhere else. And, the way they grew up, yes, that's a big part of it, to not have parents around and not be supervised, or have parents that are also addicts. Absolutely, that plays a big part. But when I really kind of evaluated everything, the one common denominator was they didn't feel worth it, they didn't feel like they mattered, and they didn't feel loved.
Yep. I in my fourth book that I just finished, I wrote that there's just nothing worse in life than to go unnoticed, unwanted, and unloved. We have devastating effects that we see every day in life, including the suicides, mental illness, that are all due to a lack of. And I call it kindness, because some children that I have met that are recovering from traumas have said, but I was never loved. And that is very sad, but also very true. And this kind of goes in exactly to my next question. And I have a really hard time with this question, so I welcome your expertise here. Is when you hear the word suicide, or when we're addressing the word suicide and the whole stigma around that too, we instantly hear the therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist talk about, well, but there was a mental illness. And this is my question, and it's a little bit unfair, but I hope you can answer it for me. I've always struggled with this, because everyone, the TVs, everyone says, well, it was mental illness. Robin Williams died, but it was mental illness. This happened, it was mental. But I always stress we weren't born with mental illness. We were actually born quite complete and whole. We come perfectly loving into the world until life starts happening, right? And so, well, I honestly believe that every child that's born doesn't come. I'm not talking about extreme cases, but
right.
Most of us do not come into the world as a depressive human being. And I just take myself as an example. I'm a happy-go-lucky kid, adult now, obviously, but I did try to commit suicide. And even back then, they called it mental illness. And I said, no, it's not a mental illness. I'm not depressed, but I do want the pain to stop.
Yes.
So that's my question to you. Is it truly a mental illness always, or is it because we have had trauma?
It can be a combination of both.
Okay.
90% of people that complete suicide have some form of mental illness. I know my husband had, major depressive disorder, so it is more common to have a mental disorder.
Okay.
there is a genetic component to mental illness and depression. An example is my husband had 2 grandmothers who had a suicide attempt. I think if all of us take a look at our own family history, you take a look at your aunts and uncles and your siblings and your parents, I think we can all probably trace some form of mental illness there somewhere. So take a look at your family history, because there is a genetic component to depression. It doesn't always have to be a product of your lifestyle or your upbringing.
I wish I could, Kristi, but I can't. Not in my case. I'm adopted. I'm one of the first adoptees in the 60s.
I understand. Yeah. But you can also factor in that possibility, right?
Okay.
Here's another thing. So if 90% of people that complete suicide have some form of mental illness, all right, then what are the other 10%? And suicide can be an impulsive act. So there are situational warning signs that a suicide is a possibility. Losing your freedom, going to jail, losing a job, going through a divorce, moving. So life stressors can sometimes cause an impulsive act of suicide. And here's what's really interesting. That's why I'm so concerned about our teens and the epidemic of teen suicide. Our teens' brains are not fully developed. Okay, so that front part of their brain, that prefrontal cortex, that is the part that's responsible for decision making. That part doesn't develop until probably around age 25. So if our teens are being cyberbullied, or if they're being bullied at school and they are going through major life traumas that with peer pressure, self-pressure, their parents and teachers are pressuring them to get grades and get into a certain college, we got to back off, because teens are much more likely to act on impulse. And if suicides can be the result of an impulsive act, their lack of brain development, that heightens the risk of teen suicide, right? So that is why we need to intervene, we need to educate so that our teens are reassured that they matter, that there's help, and that they're loved.
Yeah, and that someone is willing to sit with them, I mean, the simplicity, I think, of being with a child and a teen, even in pure silence, but that they know that you're there through the night or through, and this can be a stranger, this could be a teacher, this could be anyone, right? That's what I really stress in my book. We can't do life alone. None of us can. We're human. That's part of the human experience. So if you are feeling helpless and hopeless and you don't want to be here, or if your friends are feeling that way, please reach out. If your friends swear you to secrecy and say, don't tell anybody, but I'm thinking of killing myself, that is not the time to honor that secret. So the main message I say is, do not take this into your own hands and tell an adult you trust. Absolutely. It may be your parent, it may be somebody at church, it may be the school counselor. And a lot of times when I speak at schools, that adult they trust is me, because I'm none of the above. So that's so important that they realize that they can't do this alone, and they need to tell an adult they trust. Love it. Thank you so much for that advice. I have something that I really want to ask, so that for the listener, again, they could learn from your valuable expertise, which is, give us a few risk factors and warning signs, especially the warning signs on depression for the children, something that we can look out for.
Okay, I think the big umbrella warning sign that sums them all up is when your child starts to become somebody that you no longer know. So look for those changes of behavior. They're not eating, they're not sleeping, or vice versa. They're eating and overeating and sleeping all the time. They start to withdraw. They have a change in friends. They feel hopeless. They're spending time isolating in their room. They don't even want to come out to have meals. So, or the lack of hygiene. They don't care what they look like anymore. So they're, wearing tattered clothes. They're not showering and taking care of themselves. Declining grades, skipping school. So just notice all those things that are so unlike your child. And when you put those warning signs together, it's like you no longer know them. They're becoming a stranger to you. So don't just, sometimes it's just part of being a teenager. But when those warning signs are going on and on for 2 weeks or longer, and your child continues to get worse, or none of those warning signs are going away, that should be a clue to you. Those are red flags that you need to intervene, and your child needs help. So that's so important that parents, teachers, teens, all of us are on the same page, and we know the warning signs and risk factors so that people will get the help that they need. You can't fix something that you don't know about, right? If
Absolutely.
If you don't know those warning signs, how are you going to know? And I'll admit, for me, Bill, my husband Bill, was like the poster child for suicide. All those warning signs and risk factors, the hopelessness, the withdrawing, the becoming somebody I no longer knew, the paranoia. He didn't want to do anything. He was in bed all the time. He wasn't eating. They were all there. He had a prior attempt. He had a genetic predisposition to depression. But for some reason, I just thought in time, he'd get over it, and I would get my husband back, right? So because they were there for me, I want to make sure that all of your listeners know what those warning signs are and act on them immediately.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. We really do. We hope, I think the child, as much as the adult, hopes it will grow away or will get out of the pain somehow. And I think we feel very powerless, both the parent and the child in the end, don't we?
Yes, and sometimes that depression and what's going on in that inner pain that your child is experiencing, sometimes they'll come out differently, like the self-harm. I have a client of mine that is cutting, and, she's trying to hide it. She's wearing long sleeves and long pants, and it's 90 degrees out. So, but they just want to feel something because they feel dead inside. They feel numb. Or eating disorders, it's the only thing they can control, right? So they stop eating or they start binging and purging. So a lot of times all these issues that our teens are having, the underlying cause is the depression, and they are trying to find anything to make them feel alive or that they matter so I think we have to look at everything that's going on and, just kind of start those conversations gently with our teens instead of, like I said earlier, what's wrong with you?
Yep.
Are you doing drugs? Why are you sleeping so much? So sometimes your tone
is everything.
Is everything, right?
Kristi, I wish we had 2 more hours because I have at least 30 more questions for you. What I suggest, and I will talk immediately to Janet, the producer, is to see if we could rebook you in the new year, because I think we almost need to have another segment that is about how teens can help other teens, and specifically a little bit more also about the mental health and the adults. So I think we could easily make another segment here. But how can people reach you and how can they buy your book? Go ahead.
Well, my book is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's at Walmart, Target. It should be in bookstores everywhere nationwide. Absolutely. If they want me to come and speak at their school or read my blogs or get in touch with me, go to my website, and that is thegriefgirl.com.
That is so easy, thegriefgirl.com. Nobody writes this down. It is on our website. And thank you so much, Kristi, for being an awesome guest. And please be sure to put us on the calendar for next Monday and tune in, because we will be joined by Robin, Spitzman, to discuss her new book, Loving Out Loud, The Power of a Kind Word. And please don't forget to visit our archives, answersforthefamily.com, or go to iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, iHeartRadio. We are everywhere. And please share the post. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kristi. And see you next Monday.
You're listening to Answers for the Family with Alan Cardoza, right here on LA Talk Radio.